This episode of Your Willing Heart is brought to you by Spenga. Designed to improve endurance, strength, and flexibility in just 1 hour, Spenga offers an unparalleled fitness experience. Go to Spenga.com to book your first class.
Welcome to Your Willing Heart, where we unpack your questions about love, life, and everything in between. I'm Jessica Lowry.
And I'm Ingo Weigold, and today is episode 1, and we're talking about love and relationships. Now, this idea originally stemmed from a human sexuality class we had, where a lot of things came up that seemed to make people very uncomfortable. So we thought it would be a great idea for us to kind of get out there and start taking some questions that people may have that they don't want to talk about. Mm-hmm. So if you have questions for future episodes, you can send them to questions@YourWillingHeart.com or make them in the comment section down below, and we'll get started.
Alrighty. Let's start with Rachel from Chicago, Illinois asks, how much is too much time together?
Okay, I assume she means with her significant other, not her cat, for example.
Well, that's a question as well, but that's for another show. Yes, with the significant other. Take it away, Ingo.
Take it away. It kind of depends. I think people tend to find a balance in relationships of how much time they actually spend together. At times, and early on, when the infatuation is really strong, you tend to spend a lot more time together maybe than you may want to. Mm-hmm. And I've seen relationships where, there's a ton of time in the beginning and then it kind of fades away. And then there's the opposite too, where there's very little time and it starts to build. So what do you think is better?
You know what? I don't know if it's about better, because obviously it depends on the type of person. What I noticed though is that a lot of people think that when they jump into a relationship, or even if they slowly progress into a relationship, that means that they have to spend all their time together, and that if they don't, then that means that something's wrong, or the relationship just isn't up to par. That's what I've seen in my experience with people, and I think that stems from like high school, the norm in high school. You see each other every day, you meet at the locker after class, you go to everything, all the events on the weekends, and you're just seeing each other all the time. And I feel like that in our society, like that norm, like goes into the rest of our lives, and it's very it just doesn't mesh well with like the normal like American lifestyle, like where we're kind of more independent and we do our own things, but it's like it's clashing with this idea that we have to always be with somebody.
Yeah. And in the early stages, it seems like relationships have a lot of anxiety in them too. So as that feeling grows for someone, for example, and you don't know what they might be doing, now you want to spend time with them, and maybe you don't get to, or you do, and you come to realize that, wait a second, I don't have time for anything else. Mm-hmm. So I guess it leads us back to the question, like, how much is too much time? How does a couple determine when they've gone over the line, or if they're behind and they should spend more time together?
I think whatever's practical for their particular lifestyle. They always say in school that like it's not a problem until it starts to impact parts of your life. So, you can hang out every day or every hour of the day, but if that's impacting you getting your work done or seeing family members or something like that, or it's causing other people in your life to get upset about not seeing you, then I think that's when it may be too much.
Like if they're coming to work with you, that's probably too much?
Yeah, like bring your partner to work day. Like, no, we're not doing that. So yeah.
I think we've answered the question. I think.
Yeah.
I think the true answer is really it depends, but it's always good to communicate. And it's probably a good idea to check in with your partner on a regular basis and kind of see where they're at. And sometimes it might be a mismatch where someone requires a lot more time and the other person wants space, and that could be a reason why the relationship kind of doesn't work out. And that's okay, So
yeah. I don't think that there's really like too much time unless it's really causing problems in other aspects of your life, I think. Some people, you have two dependent people who are together. So they're very dependent on each other, so that may work for them. But if you have an independent person with a dependent person, that could cause problems. So
yes,
something to be established before you get too deep into things of how much time you like separate and together, because that's important. Mm-hmm. Okay, this was a really nice one I liked. This is from Julie in Chicago as well. What if you were in the middle of sex and weren't turned on anymore?
Wow.
Don't act like it don't happen.
Well, do you think men and women have a different way of dealing with that? Because I feel like as a man, it's much harder to hide that, right?
Yeah.
Because it presents itself physically in a, you lose your erection, whatever, and it's pretty obvious you're not turned on anymore. And as a female, I think there's more opportunity to kind of
Fake it.
BS your way through that.
Yeah, I think that, I think many women go through sex and aren't even turned on. I think it's more normal than we realize.
Yeah.
I think it happens way more often than we think, which goes back into like ideas of like, sex in general and who's supposed to be pleased and who's supposed to be pleasing who and whatnot, and how much you're supposed to be enjoying it with as like little stimulation as possible, really. That's kind of how it's shown in the movies, at least. With men, I agree. And you know what? We took this human sexuality class, and I understood that there was a lot of pressure on men with a lot of aspects, especially sexually. But I really didn't feel for them until after that class. You're right. Like, if you're not turned on during sex and you're a man, it's
obvious.
Pretty obvious.
Yes.
And that's like humiliating for the man and for the female, because now you have a bunch of issues with the girl who's probably taking offense to it, taking it, personally. It may be personal, but obviously, you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, right?
Depends.
Any personal experience, Ingo?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I read a book called The New Male Sexuality.
Yeah.
It was recommended from this class. And it talks a lot about how sex is kind of, it's a no-brainer, but it's also, you shouldn't have to think about sex. But at the same time, if you're in the middle of sex and you're thinking about other things, that can definitely create issues as far as being aroused or having any kind of, a connection with your partner.
Sure.
That old saying of think about baseball, I think that's kind of a misnomer. That doesn't work. I think you have to be engaged. You have to be willing to kind of be open to trying different things. And sometimes things happen, and if your partner's okay with that and you realize there's other ways to kind of experience sex together versus, like the traditional, style, then maybe that moment doesn't become so detrimental and it's not such a chaotic event versus if someone really gets upset. For example, if the partner gets upset that, hey, I'm not hot anymore, like you don't love me, you don't care about me, now that creates a lot of anxiety. And as we all know, you cannot will an erection. It just doesn't happen. So, I mean, you have to be turned on. So from the female perspective, I think it really comes down to communication. I don't think it's fair to a guy for a woman to continue having sex and not let him know that, hey, by the way, I'm not into this anymore, because it creates I think it's kind of not being truthful, and that creates kind of some issues down the road as well. So
Do you think that would bruise a man's ego to hear a woman say that mid-sex?
I think it certainly would, but I think communication is more important. I think you have to be willing to be vulnerable and be willing to not hurt each other's feelings on purpose, but to be honest.
But let me ask you something.
Yes.
Communication is key, right?
Yes.
A lot of people, a lot of men, women as well, but let's just take men for right now, may have difficult times with communication. You want them to have communication not only in general, but in the middle of sex when they can't get an erection.
Yes.
You don't think that they're going to take more offense to things and be a little bit more vulnerable?
Probably.
So what do you do in that situation? If you have a man who is extremely vulnerable and kind of is closing himself off to communication in that moment because he's embarrassed.
The scenario is he's lost his erection, he's embarrassed now.
Yeah.
And the woman is doing what? Being understanding, or
let's say she's being understanding.
Okay.
But he's still so upset about it. What do you do?
That's a tough one. I think guys don't do themselves any service by continuing. I think the norm is guys are going to keep trying to get his erection back, and that's not the way to do it. I think you have to focus on something else. Even stop sex altogether for a while, or try to some other way of stimulating each other, whatever. Maybe even go back to the beginning of foreplay, and that stuff will work. I mean, it just it's a natural thing. If you're turned on, things work. Unless you have some kind of physical problem, which you certainly should see a physician about that. But barring any of that, I think everything works naturally when you're doing that. But if you're really, because the anxiety,
it's anxiety, and there's so many books that talk about how a female or a male not getting turned on during sex is really kind of a normal thing, and it happens a lot. And anytime you're in your head with anything else, whether it be something else going on in your life or body worries during sex, that can completely like turn everything off.
Yeah.
And that's anxiety provoking. So it all goes together kind of. So
It does.
it's all about relaxing, being with someone that you can feel relaxing around, feel comfortable around, and talk about it. It's so taboo to like talk about this and say like, hey, it's just not working for me right now, because you're automatically thought of as somebody who, can't do something, like you are without the ability. And that's not the way that it needs to be looked at, because we're all human beings and we all have our ups and downs.
That's true.
Right?
Yes.
But
so what do we boil it down to? Communicate, be honest, don't put so much pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
Be willing to kind of reboot things. And I've had this happen, and a partner was willing to kind of just chill for a minute, and everything went back to normal within a few minutes, because sometimes it happens,
Yeah, we make it into bigger deals
Yes,
than it really is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do those things, and hopefully you'll do all right. And I do recommend, as a guy, reading that book, The New Male Sexuality. It's excellent. Easy read. It's a lot of pages, but it's really, you don't have to read it cover to cover. You kind of go to a section of something you're experiencing, and you can learn a lot from that. So.
All right.
What's next?
Claire, also from Chicago, obviously, these are all our friends. Claire says, or asks, rather, when is it appropriate to discuss sexual fantasies with a new partner?
Depends
juicy,
how
Claire.
Juicy. Yes, Claire.
Juicy.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and take this one?
Okay, so as a female, I think all these answers, the answers to these questions are really like, it depends, but I think that with sexual fantasies, I feel like females are a little bit more quiet about it, can be more quiet about it, or are maybe told to be more quiet about it and think they should be more quiet about it.
You think they've been conditioned growing up?
Possibly. I think it's more like, it's more common to hear of men, having all these crazy sexual fantasies, and women are more basic.
Because for guys, it's like a way of boasting. You kind of
sure, and it's also a way of experimenting and expressing your sexuality, which I think women are not taught to do in American culture as much as men are. It's more taboo, I think. So I think that it takes females longer to even figure out what their sexual fantasies are to begin with. And then the ones who do, experiment and figure that out, there's, how do I explain this to people? I don't know. I don't think that there's an appropriate or inappropriate time to discuss it, unless your fantasy is something that you are like kind of concerned that your significant other isn't going to be down for, which sometimes you can tell, but sometimes you could be surprised, right? Obviously, I wouldn't on the first date, unless you guys are both really kinky on the first date, and something's going to happen on the first date.
If, for example, if you met at a strip club or something.
Sure.
Anything goes.
My sexual fantasy is going to a strip club, you can say,
there you go.
Right?
Yes.
Check. So, I don't know. I don't know, Ingo. I don't know what you think. I don't know about the appropriate time to talk about that. What do you think?
I'm a big fan of being open about what you want sexually as early as possible. Okay. And I think it's important. It's a part of the communication between a couple. And I think as guys, I think our responsibility is to make it safe for the female to express her sexuality, no matter how crazy that thought might be. And even if we're shocked, we kind of have to take like a stance of, oh, that's interesting, and tell me more, versus, wow, you're really slutty. And if you kind of become that kind of, if that voice starts to become part of your relationship, you're going to find that females are not going to be open to sharing what they want.
Sure.
And as a guy, I think guys are pretty okay most of the time, in my experience, with telling their partner what they want. I think guys kind of slip it in as a joke sometimes. That's kind of our way of like, hey, I heard about this, I saw this show and there's this crazy thing, and it's really, and you're like, what show? I don't remember, but then there's the fantasy. So, but I think it's important to kind of let it out early, because sex is also a form of communication. And if you don't allow that to kind of grow over time, it kind of can stunt the relationship. So I
Sure.
think it's great to be open about it, and it's fun to talk about, So not just in the bedroom, but outside the bedroom, and at the same time, that can create intimacy and building and tension and lead to better sex.
Sure. And what do you really have to lose? I mean, we skirt around the idea and the topic because we're so afraid of what people are going to think. What is so odd about having a sexual fantasy? I mean, some of them can be really crazy. I mean, I get it. Some of them are odd.
Why they're fantasies.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not something you want to do, but you want to talk about it.
Yeah, but I feel like if you're nervous about talking about it, that means that you're almost somewhat ashamed of it. And I feel like that shouldn't, unless you're hurting somebody, if it's all good and fun, I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. And if someone's not going to appreciate it, then they're not going to appreciate it, and that's it. I mean, you're not going to be able to change their mind, really.
Yeah.
But what do you really have to lose? It's not something that should be, hush-hush about if it's something that you want to experience. I think voicing it is important. So I think it's the appropriate time to discuss it is when you want to discuss it, when you feel like you're ready to bring it up. If it's something that you're very nervous to talk about, wait until you're ready. Don't force yourself to do it. Just do it when you feel like you want to, and go for it.
A great time to talk about sexual fantasies is right after sex.
Why?
Because everybody's relaxed, Everybody's kind of, you've been together intimately, you've seen each other naked for the last however long, and it might be a good time to share, So everyone's kind of vulnerable as it is. So.
Or maybe when you're a little buzzed.
Or when you're a little buzzed, sure.
Yeah.
That's always a good time, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, take that edge off.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's next?
Good one, Claire.
Great question. Thank you, Claire.
Let's see. This is one that was not from a friend, but it was actually a question asked in the class, in the human sexuality class we took, that
Okay.
I took it down because I thought it was important. The question is, I want other things sexually from my partner, but I don't want to make him or her feel uncomfortable. How should I approach this matter?
That's a tough one.
Yeah, when
think
you
it's
know
different?
that they don't want what you want.
Oh, I see.
You see?
So you already
You're saying-
know that they're not willing to do what you want?
Right, they don't want the same things I want. So you're not on the same page sexually. You don't want to make them feel bad or uncomfortable, but you also don't want to let it go because you kind of want to hold on to what you enjoy.
Yeah.
So how should I approach this matter?
Well, I would say a good starting point would be to potentially visit the idea of seeing a sex therapist, having a third party kind of help the couple referee this scenario, because obviously you're at odds about something and it's a sexual thing, and it might be a great opportunity for a sex therapist, someone who specializes in that area,
Sure.
to kind of help you through that. If you're not willing to go through those steps, I mean, someone's going to have to compromise. Either the person who wants those things is going to have to be willing to not get them, or the person who doesn't want them may have to be willing to meet that person maybe halfway or a quarter of the way, or try some stuff. A lot of times I think the people who don't want to do certain things, maybe they've never experienced them and they're afraid. So if you could talk about that with your partner and kind of figure out where their fears lie. Sometimes it could be simple stuff. Maybe I don't think I'm going to look attractive, like in that position, for example, or I think that's going to be really dirty. Or if I do that, that means I'm like some sort of weird person. Who knows what the fantasy is or whatever. But those are just some of my thoughts.
What about if it's flipped, where your partner wants to do a lot of like maybe crazier things or raunchier things and you're comfortable with, and you don't like them, but you don't want to upset your partner and take those things away? How do you approach that?
You don't like the things that they want?
Yeah, maybe they're a little bit too wild for you, or maybe you kind of like things a little bit more traditional, and you don't want to, sound like a prude telling them that, oh, I'm not really into this. I prefer just like traditional something, so-and-so.
Just like, missionary.
Now, I feel like that's tougher.
What? To try to dial back?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
you know that you're going to be asking, or that you kind of want someone to suppress what they enjoy.
Yeah, I think it's a different thing too. Like, for example, if you're in a dating scenario versus like a marriage, when there's a family involved and everything else, that could be, if the mismatch happens at that point, you'd hope you'd catch it sooner. But I feel like people are not very good at interviewing their longtime partner these days. And that's a problem because you might end up in a situation where you're with someone that you kind of have a complete mismatch in a lot of areas with.
Sure.
So that's more difficult. But let's talk about if you're dating, for example. I feel like it's going to be real difficult to backpedal, but you should maybe mention to your partner that, hey, some of these things we're doing makes me a little bit uncomfortable, and see and kind of get their reaction, you know, to figure out where.
What if they say, well, you've been seeming to like it for however long?
Yeah. Well,
and what if you were faking it the whole time?
Well, I think it's important to say that. And going back to what I said a second ago, this would be a prime example of something that could be part of the interview process of a long-term partner. And sometimes mismatches sexually disqualifies that person from being a long-term partner.
Sure.
And that's okay, because you have to figure, every person is different. You're going to have to figure out, what am I willing to compromise? What am I not? If this is something important to somebody, they need these things sexually, and they don't get them, that could be the end of the relationship. And that's sad, but it's also not a bad thing, because there's definitely going to be someone out there who you'll find that will want those things.
Sure.
They may be lacking in other areas, so it's always a give and take. But
yeah. From a female perspective, and I feel that, in today's sexual culture, it's very common for women to kind of just go with the flow of whatever the man likes. This is from my own experience, and then people that I know, their experience, and stories I've heard. I feel like it's very easy to get yourself into a relationship with somebody where you're doing things sexually that you really aren't really into at all. You just kind of go with the flow. It's just like another daily task in a way, and you haven't.
Daily task.
Yeah,
sounds horrible.
It does, and it is horrible.
Okay.
And you haven't really had your outlet to express yourself sexually with that person, because the norm in the relationship has just been, okay, this is what we do, this is what he likes, we do it, and it's done. And that's very common. It sounds terrible, but that's so common, right? How many women out there have sex just to get it done because the man wants sex and you have sex? Really, that's very common. And then I think that it gets to a point where you're in this relationship for however long, and you're committed to each other, and you've developed a history together, and you're just okay, I'm just really not satisfied sexually, or maybe like the question said, he's doing something that I don't enjoy. And I feel like if you're at that point, which it's so easy to get yourself into that situation, time goes by and we just let it go, we let it slide, and then you're kind of faced with this situation. I feel like, I know it's hard because you care about that person and you've been with them for so long, and you don't want to look like you've been a liar or a fake or a fraud this whole time. But I also think that if you keep that lie going, that you're into the things that they're into, it's going to start really showing after however long. It's going to show on your face, it's going to show in your body language, and it'll always, stuff in the bedroom will always spill out. Issues in the bedroom always spill out into the rest of the relationship. So it's going to, it's going to shine some way, and it's not something that you really want to be shining.
Causes resentment.
Yeah.
Slowly, over time.
Resentment.
Content,
I think though, if you say, and that's hard, I can only imagine that, telling your partner that you don't like something sexually when for however long you've been acting like you do, I know that probably is going to upset your partner.
Well, perhaps they can rephrase it, for example, too. You don't have to share that, oh, I've never liked this. If you feel uncomfortable, you want something to change, you can say, look, my tastes have kind of changed. I was into this before. It's a little white lie. I think those are okay sometimes.
Oh, sure.
My tastes have changed. I'm really not into this anymore.
Yeah.
Can we stop doing this? And if it's something that the partner's not willing to stop doing, then it's time to have that talk. Hey, maybe things are not going to work out, or you don't want to end up in a situation where 10 years down the road you're married with 3 kids and all this, a house and a second house and jobs and everything else. You're enmeshed with someone who you never had sexual compatibility with in the first place.
Right.
Just because you didn't want to hurt their feelings.
Right.
That's worse, I think. So,
I agree.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to get into that situation.
Very much.
Without meaning to, with good intention.
Yeah.
It happens to many people. Let's see.
Any more questions for this first episode?
I think that's it.
That's it, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, excellent. So what we'd like you guys to do, if you have an opportunity, remember we have an email address, questions@YourWillingHeart.com. Send us questions. It can be anything relating to anything, really. Relationships, sex, you have money questions, physical, like mental health questions, anything relating to those areas, and we'll try to get that on the next show.
Yeah, and any particular problems that you have in your relationship that you want to discuss, it can be as detailed as you'd like it to be. It can be anonymous, so don't worry about that. We'd like to hear about that too, because you may think that your issues are odd and rare, but more than likely there's a lot of people who relate to them.
Very much so true. And of course, we love comments. So if you have comments about the show, you can email them to us or post them below in the video. Let's get discussions going. Let's talk about these topics. We feel it's time to kind of open up the doors and let people discuss pretty much anything.
Yes. Let's talk about sex, vaginas, and penises.
Excellent.
Let's talk about it all.
Our ratings just went sky high. So
talk about those taboo topics.
yes,
because they're important.
They are. So that's been this edition of Your Willing Heart. My name is Ingo Weigel.
I'm Jessica Lowry, and thank you so much for watching.
See you next time.